So today we're going to be looking at the newest model from Visitor. And I previously reviewed their Vale Park Officer model, which I really liked. It was a unique design, it was special. But now we have this one, the Linden. I don't know how well it's going to show up, and I really enjoy the watch. It's a dressier type watch, but it can still be worn casually. But yeah, enough rambling. Let's get into the video. Hope you enjoy. So here we are, the Visitor Linden, and if you want a little more history on the brand, you can go to my Vale Park Officer review. But just really quickly, Visitor is a microbrand from Indiana. They were founded a couple years ago, and they've pretty much stuck to having a very unique style, pretty sculpted case finishes, just very much their own design language. And I think all their models are distinctly them. So without further ado, let's get into this watch, which is the Visitor Linden. And this was teased maybe 2 or 3 years ago and is only coming to fruition now. It maybe received the least amount of interest, or maybe it took more time to develop. I have no idea, but hey, it's here now. So let's get some dimensions out of the way. As you can see, we have a case diameter of about 39 millimeters, a lug-to-lug length of about 47, a thickness of about 10.5, and we have a lug width of about 20 millimeters. So overall, a pretty good size. It is by no means too large. I think it does have a very decently large bezel, so it does cut down on the dial area a little bit. But I'm glad they kept it under 40 millimeters. The lug-to-lug is rather tame. And it's a pretty thin watch overall, so I think the way it wears is going to be very nice. And I appreciate they didn't blow it up to like a 42 millimeter size. They kept it on a little dressier. So some general specifications of the watch. We have a Miyota 9015 movement powering this watch. As you can see, it's nicely decorated there. It is a 24 joule movement, it has a 42-hour power reserve, and it has a 28,800 beats per hour. It is also claimed to have an accuracy of -10 to +30 seconds from the manufacturer. Now, Phil over at Visitor has told me that he actually inspects every watch before it is sent out and adjusts the timing to kind of get it in a range he would like it to be in, which is kind of in the -5 to +10 zone. So those are the kind of minimum and maximum tolerances he likes. And this particular model that I have has been operating between -1 and +0 seconds a day, so we're doing pretty good on accuracy. We have a sapphire crystal on the front as well as the back. And we got BGW9 Lume on the hands, the indices, the outer track, as well as the logo and the date window. So we got a lot of Lume. It looks really good in the dark, so we'll get to that later. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the specifications. So now let's get into this dial. So again, as I kind of alluded to earlier, Visitor has really created its own design language. They had the previous model, which is the Dune Shore, and they took the dial off of that model and put it in here. So they reworked the case, made it a little dressier instead of tooly and dive watch leaning, but they've kept the design elements, which is interesting because I think it does work in a very dressy setting. So we have these hands that are almost like snowflake resemblant if you've seen my Tudor versus Linden comparison, but they were inspired by fountain pens. As you can see in the hour hand there's actually a little slit which represents the pen nib, which would allow ink to flow through. So that's where he took his inspiration from, and which makes sense because he even at some point sold fountain pens on the Visitor website as well. So we have the fountain pen hour hand, followed by what I would consider kind of like a snowflake seconds hand. And we have these very interesting, what I would kind of define as almost elongated teardrop hour markers. So the 3, 6, and 9 are just kind of plain circular hour markers, while the remaining new indices are these elongated teardrops. And they have a very nice and just cool shape to them. You can see they're all outlined in this nice silver. They're nicely framed, raised from the dial. So you have a lot of dimensionality there. It's pretty interesting because as you can see, we have all the seconds in the outer track is actually sunken in. It's actually a separate area cut out of the dial and laid in and then also loomed, which is pretty crazy. So we have that as well as the crosshairs, which is also sunken into the dial. So we have like a nice actual depth to this dial for a watch that isn't that expensive. As you can see, the model I have here is the Linden Snowfall, which is their white dial. This also comes in black, kind of like pinkish, and a blue. My personal favorite is probably the blue. The white would probably be my second, maybe tied with the black, and then the third, that pinkish mauve color. One thing I do want to note on this white model is you can kind of see that the white of the numerals and of the dial do not match perfectly. I mean, that would be very, very hard to do. It's not something I expected, but it's just something I should note. I don't think most of the time that it is too drastic of a contrast. I think it still works together well, but it definitely is something I should note. But yeah, overall, a lot of cool things happening with this dial. Nice silver hands playing with the light, playing off the silver surrounds for the indexes. Nice little counterbalance. But yeah, very nice stark white dial, and we even have, if it will focus, the visitor logo, which is loomed and also done in white. So now let's get a macro of this dial. So here we are slightly more macro with the visitor. As you can kind of now better make out, we do have the visitor logo there. And I think something to just note about this dial is just how well done it really is. All the markers are cut out very well framed. The loom that is, input in them is very uniform. There's no real bubbling, no misprinting, no imperfections on the dial that I can tell of. Nicely surrounded, no real blemishes on the hour, seconds, minute hands. Very, very nicely done overall. As you can tell with this model, it's a very sterile feel. There's not really a lot going on in terms of, texturing or patterning or anything of that sort. It's just very simply done. A very nice dial, very plain, flat white. I mean, you can see how much depth that date window has, and just how nicely clean and cut out it is. Very, very cool. Yeah, I think for the $600 price point that it's coming in, the fact that I really just don't see any blemishes on the dial is just really telling of the quality, the attention to detail, and just how how cool this dial is, So I guess before we move on to kind of the case of the watch, which is another pretty interesting part of it, I guess we can get a little loom shot in. So as you can see, I mean, the loom is very, very well done. We have the visitor logo loom, the date loom, the hour hand loom, the minute hand loomed, all the indices, the outer track. It's very, very legible in the dark. I even like this kind of like little detailing in the hour hand where you have just like this plain circular shape, but then you have that small dot on the end, which just kind of points to the hour, which I just think it's pretty cool. The one thing I would like to note is that the seconds hand has no loom applied to it, which is, I think it's an interesting choice based on how pretty much every other element's loomed. The loom on the visitor logo itself isn't very strong. It's not going to last as long as the rest of the dial. It doesn't have as much surface area to apply to, but it's a nice touch that they did do that. And again, the date, it's just not a thing that I usually see loomed, so that's honestly pretty cool. So in comparison to my little Snoopy here, we can tell that the color temperatures are actually pretty similar. Uh, I wouldn't say one is abnormally brighter than the other. Obviously, the Timex will last longer because it's it's running on a battery. I think this just kind of tells how well this BGW9 Lume is applied. I like that it's BGW9 because you get that nice bluish, greenish hue versus what I consider a kind of looking green that you get with Super Luminova. So yeah, Lume, definitely a highlight of the watch. So moving on to the case of this watch, which is just another thing where, again, Visitor just makes it its own. We have, as you can see, this nice, very wide but also sloping polished bezel that leads nicely into that very flat sapphire. You can even tell we have this kind of line along the case here that actually separates the bezel into almost two parts, and that is actually brushed for like a contrasting look. You can see this nice chamfer here along the side of the case that runs all the way along and actually kind of just disappears and lets the bezel protrude out into the side of the case, and it just gives it such a unique profile, something you never really see. It's almost like the bezel was just plopped into the mid case, which I think is just a pretty cool look. And again, the chamfer just extends. We have nice brushing on the tops of the lugs. It's just a plain straight brushing out down towards the end of the case. If you take another look at the mid case, we have just nice horizontal brushing along the sides. We have drilled lugs, as you can see, which Visitor refers to as pierced lugs, which I think is just a cool little twist on the name. As you can see, this very nicely done crown logo, which is just the Visitor shield on this nice kind of bead blasted, sanded background with a polished logo. Very nicely done. And overall, it's just a very unique case. As you can see, the lugs, they kind of extend to a point, but then they double back and they cut in at a pretty sharp angle. There's a lot of angularity and just lines and smoothness and curves and sculptedness to the case. As you can see, the case wraps around and kind of just digs in at that point there. You can see better kind of from this angle that it's not really a traditional just circular case. It's more of a halfway between a circle and almost a square, because it's circular right here along the very end, but then it kind of gets a little more rounded and then sculpts back into the lugs here, which I think is just a very, very just cool and different shaping. So I definitely commend Visitor on doing something that's unique and out of the box. We have this, again, unique kind of way we have again this kind of unique way of texturing and knurling the crown, where it just looks like kind of like little serrations in the crown. I wouldn't say it's the grippiest crown I've ever used, but I've definitely never had any problem getting a purchase on it, so I think that's pretty much fine. If we get along to this case back, we see we have a nicely decorated and custom rotor for Visitor. We have the nice callback to the Visitor 3 dots that I talked about in my previous Vale Park video on the rotor bearing there. We have some nice striping on the movement itself. Nice golden inlays on the rotor if it'll stay still. As you can see, some nice golden inlays on the rotor there with the Visitor knocker symbol. It's reminiscent of the symbol that's on the crown, just without the lion, which I think is cool. It's a kind of like cleaner, more sterile look, which is definitely what this Visitor model is. You know, it's an all white, even the logo's in white, so sometimes if you're just looking at it, you're like, that's an unbranded watch. There is no logo on there. There is no branding or name. Back to this case back, as you can see, nicely finished, some nice stripes, and something I do notice, the striping on this is actually done very well. Like, there's actually some very defined ridges and valleys in a way. Like, Some lower end finishing, it just is kind of very surface. It doesn't have any actual dimensionality to it. But as you can see, there's an actual dimensionality to this. There's actually like a canal that's formed, a nice little swoop in between each one of those stripes. So I think that's pretty cool. It's a little attention to detail. Obviously, as you can see, some parts of this movement seen around the perimeter are unfinished. That's an area I think they could have improved in. But you know, for like $600, you can't ask for the world. Overall, very nicely done. And around the perimeter, we just have some general information. The model family, the model name. It's made in Indiana. And the visitor watch co. And I assume that's kind of like some serial number / model number. So let's get this watch on the wrist. Earlier I was wearing my Grand Seiko. So here we are with the Visitor Linden on my 6.5 inch wrist. Now we have I think it was about a 48.5 millimeter lug to lug, which is fairly large, but I think the case does have a nice curvature down into the wrist, so it does wear pretty slimly, as well as it's not a very thick watch in itself. At least for this model, the all white dial, usually it lends to like a more expansive feel. So I think that's definitely achieved here. I kind of like how the case is thicker on this end, but the way the lugs are sculpted, it doesn't just go straight out protruding from the case. It actually kind of brings it and narrows it in and then protrudes. So it kind of in some way visually cuts down on the size of the watch. But I mean, overall, again, I have a 6.5 inch wrist, not the largest, very much on the smaller side. And I think this watch still wears well. It's very much more a casual leaning / dress watch. And in that sense, I think it achieves its purpose. It looks nice on the wrist. It fits comfortably. It definitely will slide under a cuff. I think it looks proportional. And just overall, it is a very comfortable case. I think this is just something Visitor does wear very well. They make pretty ergonomic cases, and it's something that you don't ever feel like it's overbearing or wrongly sized. So yeah, they just did a good job there. Quick note, I've had this on the Barton strap the whole time. I think it matches very well to the especially white dial and blue layout. It came on this caramel colored strap, and you can choose between like this caramel, a brown, a black, blue, and they also have like a kind of like reddish to match. Oh, it was an they call it ox blood coloring. So the thing I don't like about this strap is how it's curved on the ends. As you can see, the color matches very well, but the way the curve is, I just don't think it matches to the case shape. It's kind of trying a little too hard to add more curvature and uniqueness to the watch, I think. What's really nicely done is this buckle, which is something, which is usually a throwaway part, but as you can see, it's nicely brushed on the top, nicely polished on the sides, polished in the I guess, I don't remember what this is called, the tang part. But yeah, look, I mean, it's sculpted, it has a unique shape. But yeah, I mean, it's little details like these where you realize, wow, I mean, it's a company who definitely tries, it goes through every little detail. Visitor watch co on the underside there, super cool. And here we have the Visitor on the strap. Now, I don't think it looks particularly bad at angles like this or, just laying on a tabletop, but when it comes to actually fitting onto the wrist, I think that's where it kind of at least loses me. As you can see, there's a lot of holes, so I mean, it's going to fit like literally every wrist size. But once I actually put it on, I mean, I don't think it looks bad. It just isn't my taste. I don't like the way that, it bows. I just don't think it matches the watch as well as a straight strap would. I think because maybe the holes are decently close to actually the case end. Maybe he didn't want the strap rubbing in any way, shape, or form. But I think a straight up strap works most of the time, and I think it would have benefited from a straight end on this model, because then it would have even looked better to use on other watches. It's a 20 millimeter lug, so this strap could have been used on plenty of other watches that have that pretty universal sizing. But for me, the curvature, I'm just not a fan. So some pros and cons of the Linden. Now, I think it is a good size. The 39 millimeter case, it will, I would think, please most people. It is a good size for, I would say, larger wrists more than smaller wrists, but the decently compact lug to lug and the way it's shaped helps it wear on the wrist. So I think the sizing they did really well on. I would love to see like a 35 or 36 millimeter model, but I'm nitpicking at that point. Another thing about it is just the design of the watch. I mean, it's a unique watch. It has a design I've never really seen before. You have the fountain pen style hands. You have the beautiful colorways that it comes in. Also, it's very accurate movement. As I said earlier, Phil himself, or maybe not himself, but I think himself, regulates the watches before he sends them out so that they're kind of like in a sort of range that he would like them to be in. So I think that's just really cool, and a kind of additional step that you get with the Microbrand that you won't necessarily get with another brand, which is pretty cool. Something I do have to mention is the packaging is really good. I mean, it's literally a 3-slot travel case that you can literally use with any other watches. You can use it as your watch box. You can use it as, just when you travel. It's nicely done. It's a nice addition. It's not a throwaway packaging, and I dig that. And then 2 pros that are just like, nice additions to the watch is one, the Lume's really nice. I dig that they went for like a blue coloration, and it's like a strap monster. I mean, it's particularly my model. It has a nice plain white dial. It will match pretty much any other strap you try to put it on. So that's cool. Now for the cons. I think even though it is a pro, a con could be the design. It is a unique design, and sometimes people like classic. They like what they know. They don't like that it's not necessarily fully circular. They don't like that it has these weird shaped hands. And I will agree that sometimes on the wrist, if you don't love the design, you're not going to like the watch. So it's something that you're really going to have to make sure that you do know you like, or at least get one and just try it out. Or at least just, try one out and see how you end up liking it. Another definite con for me, at least, is like the somewhat stock strap. I mean, it's not really stock strap because you can choose from like, I think 2 other options. But, the model of strap that was designed to be with this watch is what I would consider, not very fitting for the watch, or at least not in my opinion. It has like these curved end links, as I showed, or like the curved strap style, and I'm just not too partial to it. I don't like how it fits on the watch. I don't like how it looks when it comes together. I don't like how it sits on the wrist. So, I mean, some will love it, some will hate it. I think it's a con for me, at least. But the strap itself is very well made, so that's why I'm kind of disappointed, because like this is definitely, especially in this color, this nice light brown, I could use this on different straps. Definitely could have used it on the white dial, but just don't like how it looks particularly. Another thing is with my dial, particularly the white dial, I don't think this won't actually be a problem with the other models, but the coloration between the white indices and the white dial, it's not exact, so sometimes it'll look a little off. I don't think they match. I don't think it's a mismatch, but it definitely is something that you'll notice sometimes if you go with the white version. Another con would be they're not readily available. It has like the weightless type model, like similar brands like Halios, or Halios, however you pronounce it. When I first saw the watch, it was like 2 or 3 years ago, and I was like, I really want this watch. It looks really cool. And then they were like, yeah, we're not going to be producing this for a while. And I was like, oh man. But when it finally came out, I placed my order, blah, blah, blah. But, if you're seeing this video and they don't have them in stock anymore, then you're going to have to wait till the next production run. And that can be months from now. It could be a year from now. And that sucks a little bit. So the supply is not where I wish it would be, but it's a smaller brand, it's a micro brand. they can't have a warehouse just full of these, have a bunch of stock unsold. So I understand it, but it is a con to me. But overall, I think it's a really cool watch. It's definitely something more unique. It's something where it definitely shouldn't be the only watch in your collection. It's more of a watch where you're like, yeah, I have other watches and I think this is a cool, fun addition. And I've enjoyed wearing it. I think the hands are kind of what gets me the most. It's just the attention to detail, the amount of design that's went into this watch, the amount of attention that's went into the watch. I think it comes together into a really nice package. So yeah, if you're on the fence about getting one and your spot on the wait list opens, then I would say at least try it out. So thanks for watching. Hope to see you in another one.